It had been only a week since my wife and I settled into the cabin when the first real test of our patience arrived. The house itself wasn't grand, just a sturdy lakeside retreat with a wide porch, tall windows, and the kind of view that makes you forget the world beyond the tree line. For us, it was perfect. We had left behind the noise, the bustle, and the endless cycle of city obligations in search of peace. But peace, as we quickly discovered, doesn't always come easily when someone like Karen has you in her sights. She was the self-proclaimed leader of the local homeowners association, though in practice, she behaved less like a neighbor and more like a general patrolling enemy territory. With her ever-present clipboard and air of superiority, she seemed to believe that every inch of land within shouting distance fell under her command. The first time she came around, she started with what she called reminders, the supposed rules of her HOA. My wife listened politely as Karen rattled off regulations about the length of hedges, the colors of front doors, and restrictions on everything from mailbox height to bird feeder placement. We nodded without commitment, thanked her, and closed the door. We thought that was the end of it. But Karen wasn't satisfied with a polite dismissal. To her, non-membership wasn't an option. It was insubordination. Every time we passed her on the road, she'd give us a tight smile that never touched her eyes. She saw us not as neighbors, but as rebels refusing to bend the knee to her authority. So when she showed up on our porch one afternoon, unannounced and uninvited, I wasn't surprised. My wife was the one who answered the door this time, teacup in hand, her calm demeanor already a stark contrast to the storm that Karen carried with her. Without so much as a hello, Karen shoved her clipboard forward and declared, in a tone that brooked no argument, that we owed a community development fee. The number written at the top of her paperwork nearly made me laugh out loud. $550,000. It wasn't a typo. $500,000, she claimed, was due immediately to cover improvements, future projects, and the privilege of enjoying the lake. She recited this absurd demand with such conviction that, for a moment, I thought she actually believed it herself. My wife's reaction, however, was beautifully simple. She set her teacup down on the porch railing, looked Karen squarely in the eye, and said, "No." That was it. No excuses, no explanations, just a flat refusal. Delivered with the kind of calm certainty that cut sharper than anger ever could. Karen blinked, stunned, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She was used to people scrambling, apologizing, or negotiating. She wasn't used to someone standing their ground so effortlessly. Then came the gasp, loud and theatrical, as though my wife had just committed a crime against humanity. "You can't refuse," Karen cried, clutching her clipboard as if it were a holy text. "This is theft from the neighborhood. Theft from your community." She spun, on her heel, pulling out her phone with a dramatic flourish. "If you won't comply, then you leave me no choice. I'm calling the authorities." I thought she was bluffing. Surely no sane person would waste police time with such nonsense. But Karen had never operated within the bounds of reason. Dialed with trembling fingers, explaining loudly enough for us to hear every word, that we were refusing payment, that we were obstructing the HOA's authority, and that she demanded immediate enforcement. My wife exchanged a glance with me, half amused, half exasperated. It was so ridiculous that laughter bubbled up before I could stop it, but Karen wasn't laughing. She snapped her phone shut with a victorious glare, as if she had already won. "They're on their way," she announced triumphantly. "And when they arrive, you'll see what happens when you defy the Admiral." The title caught me off guard. Admiral, I thought I had misheard, but her posture, the squared shoulders, and the gleam in her eye told me she had meant it. Karen wasn't just the HOA president in her mind. She was something far greater, commander sailing the ship of the neighborhood, and we were the mutinous crew refusing to swab the deck. The absurdity would have been funny if it weren't so intrusive. Still, as we waited for the distant whine of sirens, I had no idea just how bizarre things were about to get. The distant sound of sirens started as a faint whine and grew louder until the red and blue lights flickered across the tree's lining. The drive. Karen stood straighter the moment the patrol car pulled in, chin raised like a monarch awaiting her escort. My wife and I exchanged a glance. She arched an eyebrow at me, and I could see the same question forming in her mind. Was this really happening? The car door swung open, and a young officer stepped out. His uniform was crisp, his posture sharp, and his expression neutral as he scanned the scene. For a split second, I thought reason had arrived to restore balance. But then Karen snapped. To attention, slapped her clipboard against her side as if it were a sword, and barked, "Officer, report." To my astonishment, he froze, straightened his back, and snapped off a salute so crisp it echoed in the stillness of the yard. "Hey." "Yes, Admiral," said voice carrying the cadence of military drill. My wife nearly choked on her tea, felt my jaw slacken. Either this cop was part of some elaborate prank, or we had just stumbled into the twilight zone. Karen's smug grin widened until it looked like it might split her face. She pivoted on her heels and jabbed a finger toward us. "These tenants are guilty of dereliction of duty. They have refused to pay the $550,000 in mandatory dues. I demand immediate enforcement." The officer pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open with the air of a dutiful soldier. "Understood, Admiral. Charges: refusal to comply with mandatory contribution to Community Development Fund. Amount: 550K, scribbled. As he spoke, nodding along like this was the most natural task in the world. I couldn't decide whether to laugh, yell, or just sit down and watch the madness play out. My wife, far calmer than I was, crossed her arms and said flatly, "That's not a law. That's extortion." Karen gasped, clapping her free hand to her chest as though my wife had just insulted the crown. "Extortion? How dare you?" Turned back to the officer. "You see how insolent they are? They are undermining the stability of this entire community. Arrest them." Her voice cracked with authority she didn't actually possess. Officer, however, didn't move to cuff us. He hesitated, his pen hovering over the page, his salute finally dropping. "Admiral," he said carefully, "I'll need to see documentation supporting this claim." For the first time since she arrived, Karen faltered. Her lips parted, her bravado wavering like a sail caught in a sudden gust. "My authority is the documentation," she blurted out. "The bylaws," but before she could finish, I stepped forward, unfolding the thick folder I had brought with me just in case. I laid the papers neatly across the porch railing: the deed to the land, the tax receipts, the notarized statement of ownership, and, most importantly, the legal notice confirming our property was not, in any way, subject to the HOA. The officer's eyes scanned the documents, and though his face remained stoic, I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. "These appear valid," he murmured, running a finger over the embossed seal. "Full ownership. Private land. No mention of association jurisdiction." He flipped another page, nodded, and closed the folder. Turning back toward Karen, he straightened again, though this time his salute carried a note of irony. "All due respect, Admiral. This isn't your ship. These waters aren't under your command." Karen's face turned crimson, her mouth working soundlessly like she was trying to swallow her own outrage. She stamped her foot against the wooden planks, the sound sharp and childish. You can't do this. I gave you an order." She shrieked, her voice rising high enough to send a pair of crows flapping from the trees. The officer shook his head, slipping his notebook back into his pocket. "Ma'am, you can file complaints all you want, but the law is clear. This property is private. If you continue harassing the owners, you might be the one facing charges." The silence that followed was delicious. My wife picked up her teacup and sipped, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. I leaned against the railing, watching Karen tremble with impotent fury. The officer tipped his hat politely to us, then walked back to his car with the steady gait of a man who'd just extricated himself from a lunatic's fantasy. Karen remained frozen, clipboard clutched in white-knuckled hands, eyes darting between us and the departing patrol car. When the engine roared back to life and the sirens faded into the distance, she let out an inhuman shriek and stormed up the path, muttering curses under her breath as the lake returned to its calm rhythm. I turned to my wife, who simply smirked and said, "Well, Admiral Karen won't be sending any battleships our way anytime soon." We both laughed then, the absurdity washing away any lingering irritation. It wasn't the first time Karen had tried to flex her imagined power, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But that day, as the officer saluted her one final time before denying her authority, the illusion cracked. Even in her fantasy navy, Karen had lost command of the waters.